29. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly, Committee Room 29. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly, Committee Room 29. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly, Committee Room 29. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly, Committee Room 29. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly, Committee Room 29. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly, Committee Room 29. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly, Committee Room 29. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly, Committee Room 29. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly, Committee Room 29. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly, Committee Room 29. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly, Committee Room 29. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly, Committee Room 29. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly, Committee Room 29. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly, Committee Room 29. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly, Committee Room 29. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly, Committee Room 29. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly, Committee Room 29. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly, Committee Room 29. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly, Committee Room 29. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly, Committee Room 29. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly, Committee Room 29. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly, Committee Room 29. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly, Committee Room 29. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly, Committee Room 29. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly, Committee Room 29. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly, Committee Room 29. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly, Committee Room 29. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly, Committee Room 29. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly, Committee Room 29. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly, Committee Room 29. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly, Committee Room 29. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly, Committee Room 29. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly, Committee Room 29. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly, Committee Room 29. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly, Committee Room 29. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly, Committee Room 29. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly, Committee Room 29. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 29. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 29. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 29. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 29. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 29. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 29. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 29. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 29. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 29. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 29. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 29. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 29. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 29. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 29. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 29. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 29. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 29. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 29. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 29. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 29. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 29. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 29. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 29. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 29. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 29. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 29. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 29. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 29. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 29. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 29. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 29. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 29. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 29. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 29. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 29. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 29. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 29. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 29. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 29. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 29. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 29. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 29. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 29. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 29. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 29. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 29. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 29. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 29. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 29. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 29. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 29. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 29. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 29. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 29. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 29. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 29. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 29. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 29. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 29. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 29. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 29. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 29. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 29. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 29. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 29. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 29. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 29. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 29. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 29. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 29. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 29. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 29. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 29. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 29. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 29. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 29. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 29. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 29. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 29. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 29. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 29. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 29. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 29. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 29. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 29. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 29. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 29. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 29. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 29. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 29. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 29. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 29. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 29. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 29. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 29. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 29. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 29. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 29. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 29. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 29. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 29. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 29. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 29. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 29. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 29. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 29. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 29. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 29. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 29. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 29. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 29. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 29. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 29. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 29. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 29. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 29. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 29. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 29. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 29. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 29. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 29. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 29. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 29. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 29. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 29. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 29. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 29. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 29. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 29. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 29. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 29. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 29. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 29. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 29. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 29. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 29. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 29. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 29. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 29. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 29. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 29. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 29. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 29. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 29. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 29. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 29. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 29. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 29. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 29. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 29. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 29. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 29. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 29. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 29. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 29. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 29. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 29. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 29. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 29. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 29. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 29. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 29. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 29. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 29. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 29. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 29. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 29. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 29. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 29. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 29. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 29. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 29. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 29. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 29. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 29. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 29. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 29. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 29. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 29. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 29. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 29. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 29. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 29. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 29. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 29. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 29. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 29. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 29. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 29. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 29. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 29. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 29. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 29. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 29. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 29. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 29. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 29. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 29. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 29. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 29. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 29. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 29. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 29. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 29. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 29. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 29. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 29. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 29. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 29. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 29. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 29. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 29. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 29. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 29. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 29. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 29. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 29. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 29. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 29. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 29. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 29. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 29. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 29. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 29. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 29. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 29. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 29. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 29. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 29. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 29. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 29. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 29. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 29. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 29. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 29. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 29. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 29. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 29. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 29. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 29. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 29. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 29. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 29. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 29. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 29. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 29. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 29. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 29. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 29. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 29. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 29. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 29. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 29. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 29. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 29. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 29. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 29. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 29. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 29. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 29. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 29. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 29. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 29. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 29. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 29. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 29. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 29. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 29. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 29. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 29. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 29. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 29. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 29. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 29. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 29. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 29. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 29. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 29. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 29. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 29. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 29. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 29. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 29. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 29. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 29. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 29. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 29. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 29. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 29. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 29. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 29. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 29. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 29. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 29. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 29. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 29. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 29. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 29. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 29. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 29. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 29. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 29. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 29. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 29. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 29. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 29. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 29. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 29.
I've started the meeting now in open session, and can I begin by welcoming members and advise members to maintain social distancing during the meeting. And today I'll provide a brief overview of today's business. The committee will consider subordinate legislation, briefing by Translink on its budget, Departmental briefing on EV task force, and scrutiny of transport common frameworks. Can I advise members that due to a lot of members today joining the meeting remotely, that it would be helpful if members use the hand up icon to register if they wish to ask questions on each agenda item. Also, if members could mute their mic when they're not speaking, that would allow us to hear the evidence and follow the meeting concisely. Could I also say to members that the room must be vacated at 12 a.m. at the latest, so I'd request that members keep that in mind when asking questions. Agenda item number 1, apologies. I have none. Is there any from any other members? No, there is not. I don't see. So no apologies given. Agenda item number 2, which is chairperson's business. I just want to seek members' views. Obviously, we have our stakeholder engagement event, which was postponed. We're thinking of a date here for Wednesday, the 9th of February, for the rescheduled stakeholder event. As agreed last week, that it will begin at approximately 1 p.m. after the committee meeting. We do need 7 members to attend, if possible. Well, not if possible. We need that for this to happen. Remember, folks, this is a lot of people that wish to engage with us that we haven't been able to have in, and that's a large section right across Northern Ireland of different sectors and groups. It would be important, this has went on a long time, so it would be important if we could have that done and dusted within the next couple of weeks. So could I get commitment from members that they could make themselves available for that Wednesday the 9th stakeholder event following the committee meeting? Members agreed with that approach? Agreed, yeah. Agreed. Okay, thanks members. Draft minutes at agenda item number 3, so at page 6, draft minutes of the meeting on the 19th of January 2022. Committee staff have been informed of an inaccuracy in the minutes in the pack. Are members content that I sign an amended version of the minutes? Agreed. Agreed? Okay, thank you members. I'll wait.
Mr. Chairman, just to verify that includes my presence, because I was marked as abs are not being present.
Yeah, pretty sure we remember you being there, Mr. Begg, so the meeting is now reflecting your attendance. Okay, members. Everybody's agreed with that approach. So we'll now move to agenda item number 4, which is matters arising. Can I turn members' attention to page 17, matters arising from the meeting on the 19th of January 2022. Could I ask members if they have any issues arising from the meeting? And turn members' attention also to page 20 of outstanding committee requests for information. Do members have any points they wish to raise at this stage? Okay, members are agreed. Okay, agenda item number 5, which is correspondence. Could I draw members' attention to the correspondence memo at page 26? Is the committee content with the actions as suggested in the correspondence memo? I'm not seeing anybody raising an issue online. I'm trying to search the screen. Agreed, and agreed in the room. Okay, members. Agenda item number 6, which is subordinate legislation. SR is not subject to Assembly proceedings. Could I advise members that there is one statutory rule not subject to Assembly proceedings at page 35. There have been no changes to the policy content since the SL1 was considered by the committee. SR 2022-7. The parking places on roads and waiting restrictions maker felt. Amendment Order Northern Ireland 2022. Are members content with the statutory rule?
Great.
Great. Thank you, members. Agenda item number 7, which is SR 2022-8. The Crankle Road Central Reservation, Ballymena, Stopping Up Order Northern Ireland 2022. At page 40 of you can read the statutory rule. The committee considered the proposal for the rule on the 15th of November 2021 and was content The rule is subject to negative resolution. There has been no change to the policy content of the ASR since the SL1 was considered by the committee. Are members content with this rule?
Great.
Okay, so members, I will now read the ASR, which is that the Committee for Infrastructure has considered ASR 2022-8, the Crankle Road Central Reservation, Ballymena, Stopping Up Order, Northern Ireland 2022, and subject to the Examiner of Statutory Rules report, has no objection to the rule. Okay, members. We will now move to agenda item 8, which is the briefing from Translink. So if you bear with me, we will have officials in the room shortly.
Morning.
Good morning, Chris. You're very welcome to this morning's committee. I'll give you a wee bit of moment there if you want to pour a glass of water or get yourself prepared.
Okay, thank you, Chair.
No problem. Okay, members, so I'll turn to agenda item number 8, as I said, which is the briefing from Translink on the budget impact. Obviously, the committee have had considerable interest in not only Translink, but indeed Northern Ireland Water and on other particular budgetary issues at this time. So at this stage, could I bring members' attention to page 48, which is the impact of the 22 to 25 draft budget for the Northern Ireland Public Transport. And at page 51, Translink outline for the future of public transport. And welcome attending in person this morning, Chris Conway, Chief Executive of Translink. You're very welcome to the committee this morning. At this stage, I'll hand over to yourself, Chris, if you want to give a brief presentation to the committee, which will be followed by a question and answer session.
Okay, thank you, Chair, and thank you, members, for the opportunity. I'll just do a short introduction and then open it up to questions. Translink has been and will continue to be fully committed to delivering safe, efficient and reliable public transport services, really to support the social, economic and environmental well-being of Northern Ireland. And we have an ambitious plan, which I've shared with the committee, to transform public transport over the next decade, if this can be matched with appropriate funding. We know from COP26 and from the outcomes of COP26 that national governments do need to invest and protect their public transport network. The estimates from C4 cities is that global public transport use must double by 2030 if we are to achieve the climate ambitions. And just to put that in perspective, for Northern Ireland, that would mean 8 million passenger journeys growth per year over the next decade to really see a doubling in public transport usage. We really do appreciate the funding that's been received during COVID-19. This has really been necessary to retain public transport services during the pandemic, to make sure that essential workers and key workers, such as including the NHS, were able to function, and also to maintain services for home-to-school services as well. And we recognise that this was required, and we're pleased the Executive recognised that as well. And it also was required to support public transport, make sure we have a public transport network in place to support the economic recovery from COVID-19 as well. And this is very consistent with the approach that's been taken across governments to ensure that public transport was maintained during the pandemic. We also really appreciate the funding that's just recently been announced in the January monitoring round. And also would like to say we welcome the funding that's also been made available to our colleagues in the industry and the private sector as well. Bus and Coach NI have really suffered during the pandemic as well, and that's been very much appreciated. And we feel that this will address the short-term funding issues. However, we do need to point out that this reliance on in-year bids to try and remain financially viable is an approach that leads to an inability for us to plan for the future, and it undermines confidence with citizens in public transport, the very people that we are trying to encourage to use more public transport. It also undermines confidence with suppliers. It pushes up risk premiums with suppliers by them not having confidence in our future viability, and thereby increases costs as well. I think the underinvestment in public transport for decades has been well documented, and in Northern Ireland there's a much lesser degree of funding for public transport than any other region in the UK. The UK Connectivity Review highlighted this, it highlighted that the per head spending on public transport in Northern Ireland is only around 27% of the average per head spending in the UK. And indeed, the Fiscal Commission report, which came out in December 2021, also shows, in the table that I shared with the committee, shows that transport in its widest sense is the only public service in Northern Ireland where spend per capita is significantly below the rest of the UK average. However, from Translink's perspective, we continue to deliver one of the largest public transport networks in terms of its rural coverage in the UK, with significantly less funding than the rest of the UK. And I think it's fair to say that public transport in the past has been treated a bit more like a Cinderella service within Northern Ireland. And if we look at the recent level of public response to both Glider Phase 2 and the All-Island Rail Review, with significant responses from the public, we can see that there is a substantial public support and public interest now in public transport going forward. And again, if we look at carbon emissions since 1990, in Northern Ireland overall, carbon emissions have reduced by 18%. However, in transport, carbon emissions have actually increased by 22% over the last couple of decades. And I think that really shows that there is a need for a change in approach if we're going to address climate change and air quality issues as a result of transport. I think in terms of efficiencies, we very much recognise the need to deliver value for money, and we're continually taking steps to deliver an efficient public transport network in Northern Ireland. In the 4 years prior to COVID-19, Translink had delivered significant savings and grown passenger journeys by around 5.8 million, resulting in a net benefit to the financial sustainability of public transport in Northern Ireland of over £20 million. Translink has also continued to make considerable efforts to deliver in-year cost reductions during the pandemic. In the 2021 financial year, it delivered 24 million of savings, and in the 21-22 financial year, we're currently on track to deliver an improvement of almost £20 million on our budget, resulting from a combination of revenues and cost reductions. And we all recognise that this has been achieved against a backdrop of significant inflationary and energy cost increases. In terms of the 2022-2025 draft budget, which we recognise is a draft budget at this point, and it only refers to proposed outcomes, and as well as that, the Minister has not made an allocation within that draft budget either. But the Department have stated that they would not be able to continue to provide the same level of service as provided in 21-22 year with the current proposed draft budget. And they've outlined some scenarios in their equality impact assessment which indicate that this would lead to a significant service reduction in public transport, and the financial viability of Translink could become a serious issue. Now, if this was the outcome of the budget, then this would involve significant cuts to the bus and rail network, which would, in effect, lead to a managed decline of public transport in Northern Ireland, with a significant impact in rural areas. And if you consider that Translink delivers 12,500 services per day, even a 10% cut would lead to over 1,000 services being cut from our network. Now, this is something we don't want to see, but it would come at a time when, as I've said, there's a lot more public interest in how we address carbon reductions and how we address air quality. And the public certainly are responding to the consultations that are going out on that. Also, across governments across the world, there's a big investment in public transport to support the green recovery from COVID-19 and address climate change. And even recently, the Health Department have highlighted the impact of air quality, that this could see a rise in projected of 84,000 new cases of disease between now and 2035, with an expected cost to the health budget of in the region of 182 million to 635 million. So we can clearly see the cross-cutting nature of public transport across health, across the economy and across the environment. And it is an essential cross-cutting public service, with benefits being realised across all departments. What we hope to see in the 2022-25 final budget is a strong commitment from the Northern Ireland Executive to public transport, to make that change that we need to see, that change in approach that we need to see, that has been missing for decades, and to see this public transport as a key enabler to addressing climate change and to improving air quality, as well as I've already mentioned, connecting communities, reducing inequalities and addressing regional economic imbalance. Translink has an ambitious plan for public transport in Northern Ireland, covering capacity increases across our rail and bus network, decarbonisation of our fleet, investment in our rail and bus infrastructure, enhanced intercity connections between Belfast and Dublin and Belfast and Derry, Londonderry, station investment, and ticketing and technology upgrades. And we plan to deliver this if this can be matched with the appropriate funding. Thank you, Chair.
Okay, thank you very much, Chris. And on behalf of the committee, could I thank the hard work of Translink staff throughout a very difficult period. Also, could I put on record this committee's complete condemnation of the attacks on the rise in attacks on Translink staff on a range of services. It's certainly not acceptable and something that this committee has roundly condemned, and I would just like you to carry that back to your staff, that they have the full support of this committee as they go about their daily function and provide that vital front-facing public service.
Thank you, sir.
In relation to where we are, so I suppose probably looking at what has been a very, very difficult 2-year period for Translink, and we know that they have received unprecedented levels of financial support from the executive as they dealt with the COVID pandemic and its impact on travel numbers, particularly in public transport. So could I ask you, how close over that 2-year period has Translink come to breaking point?
Well, I think I would say that certainly in the very early days of COVID-19, when we saw passenger, it was about 2 years ago now, just coming up on 2 years, when we saw the impact of the falling passenger numbers, and our passenger numbers at the very early stages of COVID-19 fell to just around 10% of where they were previously. We certainly were very concerned about how we would manage through that. But I would say that both the Minister and the Executive very quickly were aware of that and responded quickly with early funding for us to help us through certainly the early stages of that. And then as it became clear that COVID-19 was going to become a much longer situation, that this wasn't just a 6-month issue, that it was going to go on for a longer period of time, we certainly worked closely with the Department and with the Minister to ensure that funding was in place in the short term. So that certainly gave us, relieved the pressure, I'd say. But certainly the first 6 months were very concerning. But the support we've had since then has allowed us to maintain an essential service for people and also start planning for the future. I think now, when we look forward, the concern is how that can be maintained and how we start seeing a budget which can grow public transport again and recover our passenger numbers. We did see some good recovery at the tail end of last year. Our numbers were up around 70–75% of where they were pre-COVID. And we could see if that trend continued, we could get back to our sort of revenue numbers that we expected to see within about 12 months. Obviously, the Omicron variant has knocked that again just over Christmas. But with the regulations now changing again, we're very hopeful that we can start growing passenger numbers again and getting back to a stable position over the next 12 months. But it's fair to say that there will be support needed going into 2022 as we recover from COVID-19.
And from the committee's perspective, I suppose probably, and you might not have this figure at hand, and if not, maybe you can talk around that in percentage terms. Yeah. But what sort of travel numbers and passenger numbers were we looking at pre-COVID, at the worst of COVID, and where we are today?
Well, just before COVID, we were out turning around 85 million passenger journeys. In 18–19, we had 84.5 million passenger journeys in that year. And in 19–20, we were trending towards 85 to 86 million passenger journeys. So we were seeing about 1 to 2 million increase in passenger journeys per year. Partly to do with some of the investment, partly to do with some of the campaigns and greater awareness of sustainable transport and the need to address both air quality and carbon emissions going forward. As I said earlier, we need to see much greater growth than that going forward if we really are to address that. From COVID hit, as I said, our passenger numbers fell to about 10% of that on a monthly basis for the first 12 months effectively. Then into the summer of 21, we did start seeing significant growth, and patterns changed quite a bit. We saw a lot more leisure travel because obviously people were still working from home, and the message was very much about that. So less peak travel, and more travel during the day. And we did start seeing our passenger numbers recover then from the summer and into the autumn, trending back to around, say, 75% of those pre-COVID figures. And we would see that trend continuing during this year, particularly as we see businesses returning. We will see some of that peak travel return again as well.
Okay. And if due to reduced funding or indeed even reduced numbers travelling, we are yet to see what the trend will be as we emerge from the impacts of restrictions or consumer habits having changed as well. How do you feel that will impact upon the financial viability of Translink? Does Translink now really need to cut its cloth if travel numbers don't significantly increase COVID? I think I'm very conscious of a letter that this committee received from the Finance Minister during its deliberations around January monitoring around and indeed even October. And he talks about obviously the level of funding that was received to Translink via the executive, but he also says steps must be taken by the Department for Infrastructure and Translink to put its finances on a more sustainable footing. So I suppose, bearing in mind where we are and the conditions we are, what does a sustainable footing look like for Translink?
Well, I think there are two things. The first one is how the market recovers, as you've mentioned, Chair, and we are still confident that the market will recover. The patterns may change, but we're seeing, as I mentioned, significant public interest in people wanting to use public transport as they recover from COVID-19. At the end of the day, air quality is a big issue, and people recognise that air quality and respiratory illnesses are associated with COVID-19, and that's an issue that needs to be addressed. Greater use of public transport will help that, along with us decarbonising public transport. And we also, there's greater interest in the climate and how we address climate change going forward. As I said, we saw significant increases in public transport during the summer. On our metro services, that was getting up close to 90% of where we were, and at peak times on our rail network as well, we were seeing significant increases up to those sorts of levels again. Now, that wasn't sustained through the autumn, and it certainly wasn't sustained whenever the Omicron variant was announced. But we would see now, with regulations changing, certainly there will be hybrid working going forward, but we see that people will be encouraged during that hybrid, if they're in the work 2 to 3 days a week, rather than having a second car, that they will use public transport for those journeys. So we actually anticipate a greater use of public transport through hybrid working. And we're also seeing a greater use of public transport for leisure travel as well. People have realised that, through COVID, that maybe going on their holidays every year internationally isn't necessarily the right thing to be doing, and a lot more people interested in travelling and taking their holidays at home as well, and we see a lot more leisure travel too. So we're very confident that we'll see a recovery of that, but we're very aware that we need to deliver an efficient service that needs to be value for money, and we continuously, as I've referenced in my introduction, continuously looked at savings in the network and continually looked at how we do things more efficiently. We're introducing a new ticketing system, which will be significantly more efficient than what we've had in the past, and that will help us to drive efficiency in our services. We've also will continuously look at how we manage the peak and daytime services. Very peaky services are less efficient, because it means you have then services that are less used during the day. Whereas actually, if we get a more balanced service throughout the day, it actually will be a more efficient way to run our service. So we think through efficiency savings of how we run our service, introductions of technology, and the improvement of public transport usage, we can see us getting back to our pre-COVID sort of financial situation. But that still takes into account the fact that we have had decades of underinvestment that needs to be addressed going forward if we really want to double the use of public transport over the next decade. Okay,
and I suppose probably like any business, there was difficult operational decisions that had to be made by Translink in order to cope with not only the funding model but the reduction in passenger numbers. So obviously, one of the worries of the committee has been the reduced service provision, while understanding there had to be difficult decisions taken. I think you mentioned in your opening presentation that there's around 12,500 services a day.
Yeah.
Could you give us the figure of what the number of services a day that there was pre-COVID compared to now?
I wouldn't have the figure off the top of my head, Chair, something I can come back to. But what we tried to do during COVID and now was to maintain all of our routes, but reduce frequency on those services to make sure that we maintain connectivity for people, but recognising that we had to manage our costs as well during a situation when there was very low demand, and that's how we managed that. Obviously, with 10% of passengers going, then we would have reduced, significantly down on our frequency of services on those routes. I wouldn't have the figure just off the top of my head now, but something I could provide to you.
Yeah, no, I think it would be useful for context for the committee, because it leads me on to the next question, which obviously, given the reduction in service provision, which was due to the context that we were in, I'm wondering, and the committee indeed would wonder, can Translink survive with ongoing reduced service provision?
Well, we're starting to go back to full timetables on Metro and NIR, and starting to plan for Ulsterbus coming back as well, in line with the demand that we saw before Christmas. We obviously had to make changes to that, given the sort of outlook for Omicron and the outlook in terms of our costs as well, because in the October monitoring we didn't have a clear view as to where we were going forward. And we do have to make some very difficult choices around timetable changes on the 10th of January. And I'm sure, as members are aware, there's certainly been quite a few issues with that in terms of the connections we're providing for people, particularly around education and universities coming back as well. Given what we can now see with increased demand starting to come back, and with the more positive picture around Omicron and the recent monitoring round in January, we are starting to plan to put timetables back to their, certainly, maybe not the pre-COVID level, but certainly back to the levels they were in the autumn time. So we anticipate that the Metro, Belfast Metro timetable will return to its sort of pre-Omicron levels on the 31st of January, so that's this Monday coming. We then anticipate that NAR will return to a nearly full timetable from the 7th of February. And again, that's anticipation of businesses starting to return to work and employees starting to come back to work as well. And then we would see Ulsterbus starting a phased return starting on the 7th of February as well, between them and sort of the mid-term break for schools starting to return Ulsterbus as well. Now, all of that will be done with a clear view as to the demand we're seeing, and making sure that those services are appropriate to the levels of demand that we're seeing in the network.
Okay, thank you. And another question in relation to budgeting. So given that Translink is often the beneficiary of monitoring round bids, as we have seen, particularly in this year, how useful is a 3-year budget to Translink?
Well, as I mentioned earlier, being reliant on monitoring round bids, it means we're not able to plan for the future. Our baseline budget is always below what we need to run the network. And then we've tough decisions as to how we do that. As an accounting officer, I can't spend money that I don't have. And therefore, while the monitoring round money is essential to keep us financially viable going forward, it always comes very late in the year and very difficult for us to plan services on that basis. Similarly, an annual budget, infrastructure like public transport takes time to plan, to put in place over a multi-year basis. Having a 3-year budget certainly will help us to plan better for the future. Okay.
And finally, given the emphasis that there has been on decarbonisation, and I know Translink certainly during COP26 had a visible presence in preparation of that, and obviously have taken steps towards that journey. I suppose probably what I wanted to ask, the hydrogen bus, how has that went? What has the experience been like? Obviously I think there's one, is there?
There's three. There's three hydrogen buses in service at the minute.
Okay.
And that has gone well. The buses themselves are, very reliable, good quality, and deliver a punctual and reliable service. And we've done a number of tests of them, even outside of Belfast, going across Northern Ireland, and they performed extremely well. We've got a hydrogen fueling station in our Mild Service Centre as well, which is performing well, and we've done initial training for our staff and employees in terms of maintaining the vehicles, and working closely with Wrightbus and with Queen's University as well on the research side to take all the learnings we can from that as well, because we think there are export opportunities for Northern Ireland on that as well, and Translink, being a public transport provider, can provide a valuable sort of service in terms of trialling these buses and making them ready for economic benefits as well. Yeah. We've plans. Wrightbus are building a further 20 hydrogen buses for us, and they'll come into service around the midpoint of this year. And we're building a further hydrogen fueling station at our depot in Newton Abbey. And then we have 80 battery electric zero-emission buses being built by Wrightbus, and they will come into service starting in April this year, right the way through over about a 6-month period. And we're putting essential electric charging infrastructure into a number of our depots in Belfast. And obviously we've announced that we have another 38 battery electric zero-emission buses for Derry London Derry. And we're currently installing the battery electric charging infrastructure in our depot in Derry as well. So quite a big investment and very exciting plans underway to decarbonise our public transport network.
It certainly is. I suppose a question on the hydrogen bus element. Obviously, when we think about hydrogen and we think about the renewable energy and that move away from fossil fuels, where exactly is the hydrogen at present sourced for use on the Translink buses?
Well, for the 3 buses, we currently have a contract with Energia to supply that hydrogen. And the plan is for that hydrogen to come from their wind farm, so it will be green hydrogen, totally sourced through wind energy. Through into our depot. At the minute, we've a sort of a hybrid model where some of that's coming directly from Energia, some of it is being brought in. But the plan very quickly is to move that to totally green hydrogen. We've just done a procurement for the hydrogen for our 20 vehicles, and that will be a mixture. Initially, it will be blue hydrogen coming in with a transition plan to green hydrogen as well. Getting that hydrogen supply chain set up is actually one of the big challenges. Yeah. In Northern Ireland, there isn't a ready hydrogen supply, so mostly it will come in from England and in the initial stages. But what we hope is that by creating a demand, that we will create a supply chain so that green hydrogen can be produced in Northern Ireland. I should say as well that Northern Ireland Water are doing some work on a pilot hydrogen supply as well. And when that is up and running, we would hope to take some hydrogen from that facility as well, so that we will be serving, if you like, some of our hydrogen needs within our own partner companies. I suppose probably it's interesting because the very principle of build it and they will come is something that I would subscribe to. I think there has to be a projection of confidence in that market. For Northern Ireland has huge opportunities, but at present, and it's interesting to hear obviously that it's blue hydrogen that's feeding the 3 that's here at present. Yes, but it's very quickly planned for that to move to green hydrogen. Okay. And we have them in service letting people see them and letting people experience it. Okay. But as we bring the additional 20 vehicles in, we'll be putting them on dedicated routes, and that will be transitioning then to green hydrogen. Okay, thank you very much. That's enough from me, and I'll now go to members. So I'll go firstly to the Vice Chair, David Hillitch.
Thanks, Chair. That's like everything from you. Taking all the questions.
I'm sure you have your own.
Well, I have a couple of maybe localised issues there, and you're very welcome this morning, Chris.
Thank you, David.
The Chairman's sentiments towards your frontline workers as well during difficult times, so thank you. On the budget side of things, the amendments to the Larne line, I'm sure you're aware of the changes there. What way do you view that? Is that a long-term situation, or?
No, that was very much a temporary situation. Right. As a result we changed scheduled services across our network on the 10th of January as a result of what was happening with Omicron. And as I said earlier, we plan to put those back to normal services now. So from the 7th of February, I should say, we will start to see those services come back to normal. So it's very much a temporary situation, just responding to the current situation that we saw.
Yeah, no, thanks for that. That will give people a bit of good news to look forward to on the line there, indeed. Thank you. The security that the Chairman, or the situation the Chairman mentioned around security of staff and whatnot. There's been some bad media PR reports on incidents on the glider, for instance. Yeah. Is it beyond the finances of Translink and that to maybe look at some security measures on the likes of the glider if it is losing passengers due to this?
Well, first of all, I'd like to say, we condemn any attacks on our staff, on our services, absolutely. Thankfully, as I mentioned, when you look at 12,500 services, they are quite rare. You know, they're small incidences when you put them in terms of our whole network, but still they are very concerning when they do happen. We have implemented a number of measures. On Glider specifically, we have increased the number of staff that travel on the vehicles in the evening times. So there is, there is one member of staff on each vehicle, whereas it used to be just an auditing team. So they are there permanently, and that's mostly in the evening times is when we see these issues appearing. But generally across our network, we've also worked very closely with PSNI, and we have the Safe Transport team set up. I know they can't be everywhere. It's like PSNI generally, they're a small team, but what they do is they will analyse the incidents that we're seeing on a weekly basis, and then they will position themselves where they're most appropriate. They have travelled on Glider, for example, and they'll travel on our rail network and our bus network to reassure people, and also to provide that additional level of security. I think as well as that, we sort of reflect what's happening in society to a certain extent, and we have been working very closely with community groups in those areas where we're seeing issues, and we've had really great support from some of those community groups about how to both educate young people and working with schools and community groups in terms of the importance of public transport to the connections they make to their own community. And we've also had some community representatives even travelling on services with us, if there's gatherings of young people or anything like that, to talk to them and to explain to them how important it is to maintain the services for everybody in the community and the importance that makes. So I think it's, we have to use that three approach, the security aspect to it, and also reaching out to community groups and trying to support that sort of change that we need to see.
I've seen some success of that at the Green Islands recently. Yeah. That's good as well. Just in the autumn and early winter time there, it caused the contact in relation to sort of cancellations of services, mostly bus services out of town, and that was specific to the own area again. Yeah. Pretty frustrating first thing in the morning, obviously, but equally sort of more angering in the evening time whenever maybe the last penultimate service has been for people finishing work, getting home, that sort of thing. I know you can bring people in overtime, and that's a cost to you from a budget point of view for the evening situation, but in the morning time, obviously the time is gone. I understand the difficulties, and staff will fall ill. There's no... So what's your sort of policies on it? Is there, for instance, like a time that staff would have to report ill at for like that important morning service to get into work? Or?
Well, that was a very unique circumstance. We were seeing an increase in absence as a result of COVID, and yes, we would typically have standby drivers, and if someone reports in by a certain time, then there is a standby there to provide the essential services. And also, the inspectors and controllers will take decisions around, if there's a key service somewhere, they'll divert resources to that key service and reduce frequency somewhere else where it's maybe not going to have as big an impact. So all of those decisions would be taken on a daily basis. Unfortunately, we saw higher levels of absence, and it's part of the reason why we adjusted timetables as well, to give people more confidence around our timetables going forward. And thankfully that has receded quite significantly, and that gives us the confidence now to start putting timetables back again, as well as what we're seeing generally in the population with COVID. So we hope to both get our timetables back and to be able to maintain the reliability that people are used to seeing.
Thank you. Thank you, sir.
Okay, thank you, David. And now I move to Cara Hunter for a question.
Thank you very much, Chair, and thank you to Chris for being here today, and also to your frontline workers throughout some of the toughest times of the pandemic. They continue to carry out our important public services, so thank you for that. I just note you had highlighted there the impact of budgetary issues on rural services, and within my own constituency, it's very rural, and a large number of my constituents rely on our public transport network to get to and from work, and of course things like personal development, access to opportunities, all depends on our public transport. So I'm just mindful there, we really need that connectivity in our rural communities, more of it. We're making the case, the Minister is making the case, but do you think the rest of the Executive is seeing the benefits and the importance of our public funding going into maintaining our public transport network? And do you foresee that funding coming forward from them? Thank you.
Okay, so we have a unique network characteristic in Northern Ireland is how we run our public transport network, and it's part of the reason why we can run such a large network at lower levels of funding than the rest of the UK. Now, not something I want to continue, but it's part of the reason why we run a very efficient network. And it's a cross-subsidised model, so effectively areas where we can run a commercial service and those make a profit, we then use that to reinvest into areas where the public transport is really there for social purposes rather than for commercial purposes. Most of our social network, which relies on a public service obligation, is in rural areas, where we want to provide the connectivity, we want to provide also the frequency of service that rural communities can use. We've also invested in park and rides as well to try and get that multi-mode approach across as well, so that rural communities can recognise can be more reliant on private transport or other means of transport, but if they can get to a park and ride, then they can still use public transport for the majority of their journey. But it's certainly true that rural areas require a bigger level of subsidy than urban areas. As I said, we've tried to address some of that through cross-subsidy, but when we talk about investment in public transport, it certainly will help us to increase the frequency and increase the connectivity that we need to see in rural areas as well. And it sort of goes back to my earlier statement that change in approach to, rather than sort of seeing public transport as something that can be underinvested in, and maybe if there's money left at the end of the year, we'll do our best sort of approach, to a service that needs invested up front to make sure we can provide that essential service. I think, look, to be fair, this is decades of underinvestment, and therefore it is an approach I really want to see changing going forward across the executive.
Thank you very much, Chris. I just note the importance of buses for kids in rural areas getting access to job interviews and then hospital appointments. So just to note the importance of those routes, as you've highlighted there. I note on a positive note, the Translink is preparing a rail fleet and infrastructure strategy, talking about moving towards zero emission trains in the years ahead. And I'm grateful that this is being done. I think it shows, public transport at the heart of change. And I'm just mindful, could you just talk us through a wee bit more about that? It just seems very interesting. Thank you.
Yeah, so we've started on the journey for decarbonising our bus fleet, and we've talked about hydrogen buses, and we've talked about electric buses as well. We do need to, as part of our decarbonisation strategy, address rail infrastructure as well. Now, rail will require both an investment in infrastructure, particularly if we go to electrification. We're looking at overhead cables, and all of that will involve. And then the fleet investment that will be required going forward as well. Now, there are other technologies out there. The technology is moving quite fast, so there are trials with hydrogen trains, for example. There are trials with battery electric trains, and there are a number of regions using bi-mode in the interim, where they maybe have battery on board with some diesel as well, like a hybrid train, if you like. So there are a lot of different technologies out there, and what we need to do is because of the significant cost investment for electrification, we need to look at what's potentially coming down the line, so to speak, on those technologies to decide what we need to do. We certainly did highlight in the Union Connectivity Report that electrification or decarbonisation of rail needed to be a significant investment project for Northern Ireland. We're the only region in the UK that has no electrification of our rail network. And we also are looking at the strategy that our counterparts in Irish Rail have as well, because it would be important, again, as part of the All-Ireland Rail Review, we fed in that electrification and decarbonisation of rail needs to be considered there too. It's important we do that on an all-island basis. It wouldn't make sense to do it any other way. So we also want to work with our colleagues in Irish Rail to look at the technologies that will be available going forward. And we've been to Wales, we've been to Scotland to see what they're doing, because they are quite advanced in this as well. And if we can get the costs right, we think it would be the right time over the next 2 to 3 years to start down that journey of decarbonising a rail network, most likely with electrification, but there are other technologies we need to consider as well.
Thank you very much, Chris. That's it for me. But no, transport is core to kind of tackling the climate crisis, and it's really, really positive to see the steps that Translink are taking in recognition of that. So thank you very much for your answers. You're very welcome today.
Thank you, Karen.
Okay, thank you, Cara. Could go now to Cathal Boylan for a question.
Thank you, Chair and Chris. You're very welcome. Thanks very much for the presentation, and I'd like to concur with the Chair's earlier remarks in relation to the staff, and I want to put on record our thanks for the job, the difficult job you've had over the last couple of years in particular. And obviously, there've been challenging times, and financially as well, very challenging times. And I see that, welcome to the fact that you got the full bid in the monitoring round. But Chris, just a couple of questions in relation to finances. In terms of the reserves, where are we now in terms of the reserves? What does it stand at? And also, can you give me just a wee overview of the total amount of monies received, the total COVID bid or supports for Translink over the 2-year period? Thank you.
Yeah, so in terms of the reserves, I can't give you an exact figure on that, Cathal, because we only really got that information last week, and we now need to put that into our financial modelling to see the outcome. But certainly that will help us to break even, and we're coming in and around break even in any case, and certainly we'll protect our reserves position. And as you know, we come into this year with a level of reserves which allowed us to continue to run the network, even though we didn't have certainty around the budget. But that will help us to address that now in this financial year. We will need to take that information we've just got from the January monitoring and model that through into the outcome for our budget for this year. So we'll have to come back to you on the details around that. In terms of the total funding, I don't have it in total for the 2 years, Cathal, without just checking back in the notes, but certainly there was significant, around 100 million of funding in the 19-20 year to address the lost revenues during that year, and certainly that was very much appreciated during that time to keep our essential services running. I would have to check the 2021 year as to exactly how much of that was our normal budget figure and how much it was COVID support, if you like. So that would be something I'd have to come back to you on details on.
No, I appreciate that, Chris. It's just obviously following question time the other day, the Finance Minister was up. Now, there's still funding available centrally. Is it your intention to bid for any more funding by the end of this financial year, to say, like, if you need to top up the reserves or if you need it for other means? Are you planning to do that, or is there any conversations going on with this?
We certainly will have a conversation with the department about whether there's a justifiable reason for us to make a claim for further funding. As I said, the funding we've received gets us to a break even, which is our normal plan, and we can't really start anticipating future spend in this year's budget. But if there is opportunities there, we certainly would work with the department to see how that could be achieved.
Thank you. Just Alan, and I mean, it's of an interest, and obviously been engaged with the Minister in terms of Irish language visibility on Translink, and they're trying to promote the visibility of all that. I mean, there's a lot of people, certainly in my own area, the constituency I represent. I was disappointed it's only at 4%, but just I would like your view on, could you comment in relation to signage and more visibility in terms of the Irish language signs on Translink itself, and your vision for that going forward?
Well, our vision is to respond to the Irish Language Act whenever it comes through, Cal. You know, that's what we have to rely on. We did do consultations in some areas where there was a demand. As you know, there was a consultation done in Derry, Londonderry. There was also a consultation done in West Belfast. And where there was a positive response to those consultations, we have implemented Irish language on halts and on some services. And that's sort of our approach at the minute, where there's a demand, and we will do a consultation. And if that consultation is positive, we will also respond to the local community in terms of what they need to see. But in terms of a wider approach to that, we would really be looking to the executive in terms of how the Irish Language Act is taken forward.
No, I understand that, Chris, but I'd like to see Translink maybe take a wee bit of a lead in that too, because I'd like to say there's a lot of people who do use the service. Just finally, Chris, in terms of, and I know it's been a difficult period and numbers have been down, in terms of some of the things we've learned over the COVID period, you know, clearly want to get back up and going, and I mean, you're talking about your future plans, increasing numbers and all of that. We talked about that pre-COVID, but just any points you'd like to make in terms of what we've learned over the last 2 years and moving forward?
Well, I think what we've learned over the last 2 years is that when public transport was still running at a full network, and close to a full network as we come back into the summer, but we had less people travelling through private car, we were seeing a reduction in the emissions, improved air quality, and certainly helping the climate. As we've seen some of that coming back, we've seen people coming back maybe to more private car use, and we were starting to see those emissions go back up again. So I think the learning is very much that we need to encourage people as they're thinking. I mean, a lot of people have been working at home for a long period of time perhaps, and they're now maybe thinking about coming back in a hybrid way. Now's the key time for behaviour change. Now's the key time to say, well, if you're thinking about coming back, take a thought for public transport. Now, we have worked with some big employers in Belfast and across Northern Ireland, and we intend to now start looking at that going forward. In fact, with the civil service as well, to say, how do we put some communication in place for your employees who are maybe thinking about coming back in a hybrid way, to maybe do it differently this time, and maybe look at a different approach. And I think we've learned a lot about how we can drive down emissions during COVID-19, and it's maybe taking the lessons from that as we grow back again, to do it in a different way and change behaviours. And I suppose that's the key lesson for us going forward. There are some more tactical things around, as I mentioned earlier, around leisure travel versus peak time commuter travel. And I think, again, with flexible working, we can ease the peaks, because everyone doesn't need to start work at 8 o'clock in the morning, and therefore we can ease the peaks, as we call spread the load over the shoulders, and that will help us to deliver a more efficient service as well. And I think we've learnt that as well, that we can actually change the pattern of our services at peak times and to deliver a more efficient service.
Okay.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you, Chris.
Okay. We now move to Liz Kimmins for a question.
Thanks, Chair, and thanks, Chris, for the briefing. Just, I suppose, I wanted to start by welcoming the reinstatement of the Newry to Dublin hourly service just after Christmas there, and I think you'll know it's something I've been raising for some time, so it's definitely welcome. But just since then, Translink had announced there would be service reductions at the beginning of the year, just to see was there any update on when they will go back to I suppose, to normal operation.
Yeah, so we expect, we're starting to plan for the return of services now, and that's based on where we are with the Omicron and also where we are with the monitoring round funding in January. So we anticipate Belfast Metro services going back to a normal pre-Omicron timetable on the 31st of January, so that's next Monday. NAR will go back to full timetable, again pre-Omicron sort of timetable, on the 7th of February, so the week after that. And then we'll phase Ulsterbus, again starting on the 7th of February through to mid-term, whenever we get changes around schools as well at mid-term. We'll phase Ulsterbus back over the 2 to 3 week period, starting on the 7th of February as well. So that's, for us, that's a pretty quick change around timetables, from what we had to do on the 10th of January, and then changing back again as well. There's a lot of planning and work goes in the background to make that happen, but we're pleased to be able to announce that today, that those that's when we expect to see timetables returning to normal.
Yeah, no, well, that's good. I suppose I was only going to ask then, based on that, what, had the decisions been rural proof, to have we any assessment of how workers and students were impacted by the reduction in services? Obviously, it's only for a short period, Chris, but have we had any feedback on any of that?
Yeah, no, we certainly had feedback. What we tried to do is always maintain connectivity but reduce frequency. So for some people, they were still able to make their journey, but it maybe meant that they were starting a bit earlier in the morning, or in some cases we had feedback that it was getting them in a little bit too late. We also tried to substitute services. So, for example, where we had reduced timetables on the railway, we maybe put in a substitute bus service as well. So for a lot of people, that created frustration. Any change, people don't like those types of changes, particularly if it's a pattern that they've got used to in terms of travelling to school or travelling to work. But we always made sure that there was a connection they could make. Just may not have been an ideal connection, but there was a connection that they could make. And where we had feedback where that wasn't possible, we tried to make adjustments to make that appropriate.
Yeah, thank you. Just a couple other things. Obviously, we've all talked about how important it is that we do invest in our public transport. But also that we make it more accessible and more attractive for people to use, particularly in the context of climate change. And last week, I suppose we had a conversation with the Minister around the concessionary fare scheme, and particularly following the motion passed in Belfast Council to support free public transport for young people. We have been raising around the half fare for people with certain disabilities, and been lobbying for it to be increased to full fare. The Minister has said last week there is some work ongoing in relation to that. So it's just to see, have you had any engagements with the Minister on that issue? And have we even some sort of a time scale for the progression of that?
Yeah, so we also, in terms of accessibility, particularly with disability groups, we engage quite heavily with MTAC and RNIB and other organisations like that in terms of what their, the groups that they represent need, and certainly there has been an ongoing lobby for that concessionary for disability groups, and in fact we had to make an adjustment on glider for that in any case. So we would certainly welcome a change to that. And to allow those groups to get the full concessionary fare. We think it's appropriate. It helps to make public transport more accessible. A lot of these groups, public transport is their only mode of transport, and therefore that is something that needs to be addressed. And plus there's something around cares for those groups as well, in terms of their needs for public transport as well. In terms of the wider debate around concessionary fares for young people, we work very closely with the Northern Ireland Youth Forum, and we have a Translink Youth Forum as well. And going back 2 or 3 years, they have been lobbying for concessionary fares for young people. And as we know in Scotland, that has already been implemented. That there's a full concessionary fare now for young people up to age 22, and we would be very supportive of that. We think that's where you can change behaviours as well, and keep young people on public transport for longer, help to change that attitude of moving to just at the point whenever young people are thinking about moving to a private car, we take the half concessionary fare off them at age 16. It seems sort of quite a strange thing to do whenever we're trying to encourage them to stay on public transport. So we would be very supportive of that approach. We think it will help to change behaviours in the long run and help future generations actually make better use of public transport.
Yeah, well, that's brilliant. I mean, certainly very positive, and as you said, it's kind of that early intervention, thing where people have normalised it, and it's part of their routine, and they're more likely to continue doing it. My last point's just in relation to the report that there was an increase in staff absences due to COVID, and obviously I hope everyone is doing well and nobody has been severely impacted by that. Just to kind of get an update, Chris, on what the staffing situation is like now. Is it still a big issue, or are you seeing improvements?
Well, we started to see an increase in absence just before Christmas, but in reality that sort of lasted to maybe the week after Christmas, and has steadily declined since then. So we're seeing absence levels for COVID in and around 2%, which is significantly lower than we've had seen across all our public services. We're very pleased with that, and that's part of what's indicating to us that we can start putting timetables back to normal now. So we're hopeful that can be maintained as we go through this period. But certainly we're pleased with the progress we've made in reducing COVID-related absence.
Okay, well, that's good. That's good to hear. Thank you, Chris, and thank you, Chair. That's all from me.
Okay, we now move to Andrew Muir for a question.
Thank you very much, Chair, and welcome, Chris, to the committee. I would declare at the outset I'm previously an employee of Translink, and I would express alongside others my appreciation for the work that all key workers do employed by Translink, and utter condemnation for the attacks that they've been faced over recent months and unfortunately many years. Just a couple of questions. First of all, just in relation to finances, I do obviously very much welcome the successful bid and monitoring round towards Translink, and I entirely concur with what Chris has said about that the continued reliance upon delivery of our public transport system upon monitoring rounds is not acceptable. If in the context of COP26 we really need to do much better than having to deliver our bus and rail services on a wing and a prayer by monitoring round allocations. As a follow-up to that, there is capital funding which is unspent within this financial year, and if it is not spent, it's likely it will have to be handed back through Treasury. It's just maybe an update really from Translink in terms of all the efforts they're making in terms of maximising capital funding for the benefits of our public transport system. So it's just to see if there's more more update can be provided in relation to that. The other one is in relation to the 3-year budget, and just really what Translink's views are in terms of the potential impact upon that, in terms of delivery of bus and rail services across Northern Ireland. I've got a couple of other questions, but maybe we'll just focus on the finance one to start.
Okay. So in terms of the capital, I'm pleased to say that we, at Translink, we have always spent out our capital budget every year, and we intend to spend out our capital budget this year as well. In terms of addressing some of the underinvestment, particularly in our rail network, we have significantly increased our capital spend over the last few years, and that's allowed us to do significant investments in our rail infrastructure. Our rail infrastructure is a £3 billion asset, and it involves, not just the permanent way, the rail tracks and the ballast that holds all that together, but also all of the signalling, also all of the structures along the rail network. We have literally hundreds of structures and thousands of culverts and bridges and sea defences, all which have to be maintained right across our network, 300-mile network of rail. So that has suffered from underinvestment. We've been able to start addressing that now. You'll be aware maybe over Christmas that we had a significant blockade, and that's something we've just introduced over the last 2 years. We really effectively close parts of the network over the Christmas period, which is a quiet period, and do major interventions. So we've done that around the Dark Arches at White Abbey. And we also did some investment at Whitehead and also around Adelaide as well, around some bridge structures there. So that's been an important change for us, to really make sure we maximise the capital that we have, is to do those big blockades and invest in the capital. As you know, we've also started to invest in our stations as well across the network, and the Belfast Transport Hub would be one of the flagship projects that we're investing in as well. And of course then, we've already mentioned the decarbonisation of bus fleet and rail fleet going forward. So that capital investment will be vitally important to us, that we maintain that over the next decade at the levels we're now starting to reach. It's very difficult for us to plan major infrastructure investment at the tail end of the year and to try to spend anything more than what we've already budgeted. But I can assure the committee that we plan to spend out our capital budget and make sure that we actually deliver the projects that we had planned for this year. And we certainly would plan to increase that spend next year and continue that investment in the capital spend. Obviously, the resource spend needs to come with that then. If we invest in the capital, that helps us to have a safer railway. It helps us to increase capacity in our bus network as well. We obviously need the revenue to go along with that to increase frequency and decrease services too. So that will be an important part of what we need to see going forward. And I suppose that brings me to your question on the 22 to 25 budget. Certainly having a 3-year budget definitely gives us more certainty, and that's certainly the right way forward for us. But obviously then the baseline budget for us needs to meet the requirements we need to see going forward. If we have a 3-year budget which is below our baseline of our network, then that tells us that we need to do something with the network, pretty much, because we know that's going to be an impact for us during the year. So it's important for us in both ways. It's important for us to get that commitment going forward, but obviously it would be a concern if we didn't get that commitment going forward.
Just one other thing, obviously there's 2 climate change bills passing through the Assembly in relation to that. This one, obviously, it's a policy and legislative issue, and you've probably been inhibited from commenting in relation to that. But just my opinion is that those bills need to be matched with funding, and in order to realise our goals in terms of net zero and also tackling the climate crisis, would you really agree with me that it's important that that funding is provided to yourselves? And maybe just the last question really is that obviously I live in Bangor West, right beside the railway line, and recent days I've seen trains going past which are a lot more passengers on it, which is really, really encouraging to see. And obviously there's real desire to get more business travellers back as part of the earlier discussions in the committee. Just want to see if you give us a bit of an update in relation to the project which has been undertaken to make it easier for people to pay and purchase tickets for travelling, because that's one obviously of the key barriers to getting people to use public transport.
Yeah, so in terms of climate change, I think the climate change bill is very important. I think what it does is puts a statutory puts our climate change targets into a statutory footing, and that certainly will help to support the budgets required to deliver that. And that's why I think the climate bill is important going forward. And I suppose I would really like to see, either one of the bills go forward in this mandate. I think it would be a real shame if we weren't able to achieve that in this mandate. In terms of passengers, look, making public transport easy to use and attractive is really important, as well as the investment. We've got to invest in the right things, and certainly making our ticketing offering easier for people to use right across our network, and making it more integrated so that you can get on a bus or a train, or be it a metro service or an also bus service, and just tap on and tap off contactlessly. And that's the system that we're going to be implementing. We're starting to roll it out. We've done a couple of pilots in small areas in November and early in January this year. And then come March, we will be starting to roll that out on our metro services. This summer, we'll roll it out in our Ulster bus services, and then NIR at the end of the year and into next year. And that will mean that you'll be able to travel on any public transport service across Northern Ireland using either a Translink provided stored value card, or your own debit or credit card, just tapping on and tapping off right across the network. It will be the largest integrated ticketing solution outside of London, very similar to what London have, but it will be the largest integrated ticketing solution outside London, and will make public transport much easier for everyone to use, but also easier for tourists and people coming to our cities and towns to use as well. So that will be a significant advancement in how people use public transport in Northern Ireland.
Thank you, Chris. That's really welcome news. Thank you.
Thank you, and we still have a number of members to ask questions, so could I just ask, because we have another briefing after this for both questioner and respondent, just to bear that in mind, please, okay, and be as succinct as possible. We're now going to Roy Beggs for a question.
Hello, again, thanks for your presentation. I too would want you to put on record my appreciation of your staff for the work that they've carried out as key workers, and indeed as ongoing as frontline workers as well, providing that essential service. Now, in terms of the 27% funding per head of population in Northern Ireland compared to GB, are you able to outline that figure in terms of both resource funding and capital funding? Translink has benefited frequently in last-minute capital funding, with being able to order buses near the end of the year, but I'm just trying to clarify the per head of funding in terms of resource funding.
Yeah, so that figure takes both into account, Roy. So it takes capital and resource funding into account. And it's a figure actually that's produced by both by the Northern Ireland Assembly research team and also by Westminster, which produces the funding on a regional basis across the UK. So that's where the data comes from. I don't have the detailed breakdown here, Roy, but I can certainly provide that for you in terms of where those papers come from. But it does take account of the overall funding into public transport across the UK, government funding that is across the UK. And I think one of the things that's maybe in Northern Ireland, the only actual, if you take aside concessionary fares, which is a fare being replaced in a different way, capital funding, the only funding we actually get is what we call public service obligation funding, which is for the rail network and the bus network. Traditionally, our bus network has had a very low level of public service obligation funding because of the cross-subsidy that we try to do. Across the UK, there's an element of funding which they call BSOG, which is Bus Service Operator Grant, which is a replacement for fuel duty rebate, effectively. Now, that's something we don't get in Northern Ireland. And then there are other funding which come from local councils for rural areas and rural services. And now you'll see funding for green buses, and so there's quite a few funding streams in other parts of the UK, both from the Office for Zero Emission Vehicles, from the Department for Transport, and from local councils. Whereas Translink is very reliant on that one chunk of funding coming from the executive.
Can I outline your role as accounting officer, where you have to take tough decisions, and you've indicated there are difficulties with the current draft budget. How would you decide what you will do if there's not additional funding made available? How do you decide which services you would have to cut, or alternatively, how much to raise fares by, which would be equally unpopular?
Yeah. Well, that's something we work together in very close collaboration with the Department of Infrastructure on. Obviously, any change to the network will require consultation and equality impact assessments to be done, and all of that work would have to be done before we make any final decisions. But I would say that, you know, you've got to look at this in terms of value for money. Subsidy into bus is around 75 pence per passenger journey. Subsidy into rail is about £2.50 per passenger journey. You know, so we'll have to look at all of that to recognise that there's no area that would, you know, we would not have to look at in terms of both the rail network and the bus network to make sure we had delivering the service that people wanted to see. So that would be something we'd have to work very closely with the department on. And obviously fares are also regulated by the department, and something you know, we'd like to see. During COVID, it has been very difficult to address fares, obviously, but certainly Translink are of the view that there should be you know, an annual review of fares to take account of inflation and everything else, and that should be done in a fair way and a consistent way. But it's better that that's done every year and consecutively, because then that builds up over a long period of time, and that's something that will need to be addressed in the future as well, Roy.
Yeah.
There's increased awareness of the adverse effect of traffic pollution on terms of health and flows in the vicinity, and indeed a widespread willingness to address climate change, of which public transport can play an important part. So does it seem to you that there are aspirations which are not being met and delivered in terms of budgetary decisions?
I think there is recognition of climate change and air quality issues, and as I said, I think there is a much bigger public interest now in investing in our public transport network to address those issues, and I'm hopeful that that will be what politicians hear on the doorsteps as well as we come up to an election, and that should start to see changes in approach to how we invest in public transport going forward. I suppose when you know, we have ambitions as to what we want to see, and probably our ambitions, as I mentioned earlier, to really see that doubling in public transport usage over the next decade. We need to be seeing around an 8 million increase in passenger journeys per year. And I think the realisation of that's how big the figure is, I don't think has actually distilled yet, Roy, that this is a big change we're talking about. And that's a significant change in approach that will be required to achieve those sorts of numbers. You know, over the 4 years prior to COVID, we achieved about a 1.5 million growth in passenger numbers per year. You know, to start seeing 8 million passenger journeys growth per year will require a significant change in our approach to public transport. So I'm not sure that level of approach is yet matched by the ambition that we need to see.
Okay. Happy enough?
Just in terms of public investment, there's the new Belfast Transport Hub, which will play a key part. But has Translink looked at divesting its assets who are not related to public transport? I know at one point you owned the High Street car park. Is that still the situation? Will you be investing in your transport hubs going forward?
Yeah, I mean, that is certainly any assets which are surplus. We will look to opportunities to divest of those, Roy, if that can make a change to our funding. Some of those generate revenue, and therefore it's difficult for us to see how that would solve the issue. But certainly, if that's a direction that we need to go in, we won't shirk away from that as something that we need to do.
Okay, thank you, Roy, and thank you. Can we now move on to George Robinson, please? And remind members, please, be as brief as possible.
Thanks very much, Chair, and thanks to Chris for his presentation as well, and to the staff. They do an excellent job, and I hate to think that you know, they've been abused in any shape, form, or fashion, because they're the salt of the earth, as far as I'm concerned. As far as we're concerned here in the Valley, they do us a tremendous job. A couple of points, Chris, and I'll be as brief as possible. The new car park at Ballerina, which services the Londonderry to Coleraine hub, that was extended not so long ago, maybe about a year ago approximately. But people complain to me that it's still very, very small, particularly for normal parking. There's plenty of parking for disabled, but they've taken away quite a lot of the normal parking. I was just wondering if there's any plans maybe to extend that again. The second point is in relation to the town service. Just how sustainable is that, the wee town service, particularly here in Limavady? It's, to the best of my knowledge, it's pretty well used, and would hate to think it would ever be taken away, and particularly for elderly people to do their shopping and so forth. Thanks, Chris.
Okay, thank you, George. So on the first one in Ballerina, we have a plan to increase the number of spaces at Ballerina to 200. And that is currently, the business case is currently being generated for that, and we'll be bringing that to Department very soon. And that will enable us then to start the planning process to do that. So it would probably be 23-24 financial year before we would deliver that, George. But that certainly is our plan, to increase the parking spaces at Ballerina. In terms of the town service, I mean, those town services right across Northern Ireland are a vital connection for communities. They are services that aren't commercially viable. They are delivered for social reasons, to connect the elderly, to connect education, and connect local, young people as well to different areas around those towns. So that's an area we'd like to protect. If we receive the budget coverage to be able to do that, George.
Okay.
Thanks very much, Chris. Thank you.
Thank you, George. Now go to Patrick Delargy for the final question. Sorry, we're not picking you up, Patrick.
Can you hear me okay now?
We can hear you now, yeah.
Okay. I just wanted to start off by saying I'm just looking through the 7-point plan there. The 7-step plan on taking the North's public transport towards 2040. I noticed number 4 is about enhancing rail connections, including on the Derry line. So I know you've mentioned in your aims to introduce the half-hourly service and completion of phase 3 works. And the department are obviously taking this forward, but could you comment on the vital improvements to the Derry line? Do you have a date when you could, I suppose, anticipate when that would begin?
Yeah, as I mentioned, look, part of our ambition, and I included in the document I gave the committee, was to improve intercity services between Belfast and Dublin and Belfast and Derry, London, Derry. We did, as you know, after phase 2, introduce an hourly service between Belfast and Derry, London, Derry. We have phase 3 effectively comes in 3 parts. The first part is the renewal of 20 miles of track between Castle Rock and Eglinton. That business case is with the department now, and we hope to start procurement of that back end of this year into 23, with a delivery plan for later in 2025, 2026. The second part of that is to look at passage loops on that stretch between Derry, London, Derry and Coleraine. And again, where the feasibility study is being completed now, we'll bring that forward in the summertime. But if we can get that approved, that will be delivered in the same time frame as the first part of phase 3, which is the renewal of the track. But then you move on to how do you then get a half-hourly service reliably between Coleraine and Belfast. And there are a number of different projects which will be required for that, including passing loops right across that part of the network. And that will require an additional level of investment over what we sort of know as phase 3. And that's something we're starting to prepare feasibility work on now, to start looking at how that could be done. That would probably take us, beyond 2025 to deliver that piece of work. But certainly the work we're working on at the minute is the half-hourly service between Derry, London, Derry and Coleraine, and then looking at the further investment needed to get a half-hourly service between Coleraine and Belfast.
Okay, so just to kind of touch on one of the points that you raised there, if it's a half-hourly and we're waiting on Coleraine, then, if you've said that won't be kind of going until 2025, what time frame are we looking at for half-hourly service between Derry and Belfast? I know I understand the difficulties, but, could you give a year?
Yeah, well, at the minute that work is only being done at a feasibility stage yet, Padraig, so it's a wee bit earlier for me to give you any dates around that. But the work that needs to be done between Coleraine and Derry, London, Derry, that will have to be done as one chunk of work. and that will be done, as I said, starting in late 2025 into 2026 to do that piece of work. That will require a blockade on the network as well for a significant period of time, so that's important that all that has to be planned very carefully. The work then between Coleraine and Belfast will require passing loops at several locations between Belfast and Coleraine, and that still all has to be planned out. So I couldn't give you a date yet, but it certainly will come after that. Now, we can deliver some peak half-hourly service between Belfast and Coleraine, but it wouldn't be a reliable service to run all day, and that's why we'll need additional passing loops.
Okay, I had met with Translink officials in the last week or so, so hopefully, that could be done even simultaneously, so that by 2025 we would be able to at least look at having a regular enough half-hourly service. Just on another point that I raised with the officials, obviously one of the focuses that I know a lot of other members have brought up today is on the need to decarbonise public transport. I'm glad to see the commitment on these documents, as well as the announcement for the new zero emissions bus fleet in Derry. So will that entire new fleet thing, will that all go into service in 2023, or will some of that arrive sooner?
No, 2023 is the target for the Foyle Metro service to be the 38 vehicles going in there for that full city service in Derry, London, Derry. There's significant infrastructure that has to be enabled for charging infrastructure at our depot there, as well as then the buses being procured and built. So it will be 2023 before we see that, but it'll all come at one batch during that time frame.
Okay, looking forward to seeing that. Thanks for clarifying that. Just one final point then.
Quickly.
Just around climate change and creating obviously a more sustainable society. Obviously one of the big elements of that is, as well as creating public transport, that we encourage people to walk and to cycle. I wonder, could you just give a brief comment on what Translink's doing to achieve this in terms of, obviously Translink currently have a policy to restrict bicycle access on trains before 9:30 a.m. Is that something that you're looking at revising?
Well, the integrating with active travel is very important for us, and we're working closely with Sustrans and with the department's sort of cycling and walking unit and their active travel unit to look at how we make that integration work. So, for example, on the glider network, there are a number of cycle storage facilities on the glider network. We've just done an assessment of our entire network to find out what the cycle storage capability is and the accessibility of cycle routes to all of our key halts and stations. And that will help us develop our plans going forward to enhance that and improve that. And it is about that integration. I think carrying cycles on trains and on buses will always be fairly limited in terms of how we do that. It's about connecting the networks so that people can get to a train station or a bus station by cycling or walking easily, and then when they reach their destination, they can also cycle or walk easily on that next part of the journey. And that's where we're working with. We're also working with Belfast Bikes, for example, as well. When we introduce a new ticketing system, could we add the ability to add a bike journey to the end of your journey with public transport as well? So they're all opportunities, I think, to integrate public transport and active travel.
Okay.
Well, that's encouraging. I'm looking forward to hearing more about that. Thanks.
Thank you. And can I, on behalf of the committee, thank Chris for his presentation this morning and extensive questions. Very much appreciated by the committee, and we wish you and your staff well in the forthcoming year. So thank you very much.
Okay. Thank you very much, Chair. Thank you, members.
Thanks. Okay, members, we'll wait until everybody's back up on Starry. Everybody's back up now. Okay, members, that was quite a useful briefing session. Now we are working off the space now of 30 minutes, and we have the department coming in now for the briefing on EV Infrastructure Task Force, and followed by that we have a common framework to get through as well. So we will go straight in now to the briefing on the EV Infrastructure Task Force. Officials are joining online. I'll just wait for them to come in. Joining now. Members, I'd turn your attention to page 54, the clerk's memo, and indeed page 56, the Electric Vehicle Infrastructure Task Force update. And can I welcome attending via Starleaf Liz Loughran, Director, Transport Policy Division, Tim Weir, Transport Policy Division, and John Starkey, Transport Policy Division. You're all very welcome to committee this morning. Forgive us if we seem slightly rushed, but that briefing with Translink went slightly over time. Important issues to discuss. So could I say from the outset, if we do not get the questions fully covered today, the committee may submit in writing further questions to help with the process in relation to the task force. So at this stage I'll hand it over to whoever's taking the lead on this to give a presentation to committee.
Okay, thanks Chair. Thank you for the introduction, and also thank you very much for the invitation to provide committee members with an update on the task force. As you'd already said, I'm Liz Loughran. I'm the Director of the Department's Transport Policy Division, and I'm joined this morning by Tim Weir and by John. Tim is the head of our Transport Decarbonisation Unit, so he's been leading on the establishment of the task force and working together with the task force. So I'm going to hand over to him and he'll take you through the task force work to date.
Okay.
Thank you very much, Liz. So, Chair, thank you for the opportunity to brief committee members on the role of the EV task force in the overall decarbonisation of transport. The Minister is committed to delivering cleaner, greener infrastructure that contributes to achieving a low-carbon future, and so the Department for Infrastructure is leading the development of policy options to help decarbonise the transport sector. This included leading the work on the transport theme of the Executive's Energy Strategy, which was published on the 16th of December by the Transport Working Group. The Transport Working Group comprises of a range of government, non-government and industry representatives, and this group will continue to have overarching responsibility in relation to progressing the wider decarbonisation of transport. The outworkings of the work taken forward by the Department in developing its input to the energy strategy was a recommendation to establish a subgroup of the Transport Working Group specifically focused on electric vehicle charge infrastructure. In the latter part of 2021, the Minister announced the establishment of the EV Infrastructure Task Force. Organisations from the public and private sectors with a role to play in the area of electric vehicles were invited to take up positions on the task force, and I am pleased to say that all of those contacted agreed to sit on the task force. The task force is led by the Department, and the current membership includes representatives from the Department for the Economy, the Utility Regulator, NIE Networks, ASB, Derry City and Strabane District Council, as the lead of the Council Consortium developing an application for funding from the On-Street Residential Charging Scheme, the Consumer Council for Northern Ireland, the CBI, and the Electric Vehicle Association for Northern Ireland. The first meeting of the task force was held on the 16th of December, with the Minister opening the meeting. In welcoming everyone to the task force, the Minister emphasised to the group the need to work within the context of the energy strategy to ensure a coherent approach to the decarbonisation of transport. At this first meeting, the members of the task force agreed its terms of reference. In agreeing these, the task force confirmed it shall function as a subgroup of the Transport Working Group and will deliver an EV charging infrastructure plan by the autumn of this year. The Department, as chair of the task force, shall represent the task force on the Transport Working Group. At this first meeting, it was also emphasised that it was important the members of the group understood the development of the EV Infrastructure Action Plan must be brought forward in the context of the transport hierarchy set out in the publication The Future of Transport, A Time for Change. The hierarchy prioritises active travel, walking, wheeling and cycling, and public transport. The task force agreed to this principle. It was also agreed that members of the task force would establish their own working groups to bring forward evidence-based data that could be used by the task force in progressing its work. The members were also informed of the publication of the four research projects commissioned by the Department as part of its work on the energy strategy, and in particular were referred to the report on electric vehicles in Northern Ireland, which will be a useful source for the task force. The group received two presentations, one from ASB with regard to the public charging network and its plans to update the network following the award of funding through the Levelling Up Fund, and the other from Derry City and Strabane District Council on the development of an ORCS application by our local councils. The next step for the task force is to hold a workshop in the first quarter of this year to pull together ideas from the members, which can then be analysed in the context of the transport hierarchy and fed into the development of the action plan. And that's where we are now.
Okay, thank you very much. You're happy now to go to questions? Yep. That's much appreciated, and I know we are pressed for time, so I will be guillotining members to try and, as quick as possible, one question per member, and anything else can be supplied in writing. So firstly, obviously, there's been quite a range of criticism regarding the EV infrastructure that is in place. That criticism hasn't just been from the committee, but indeed from electric vehicle users and those considering going towards electric vehicles. So can I ask, firstly, I suppose it says in paragraph 2, which was the correspondence from the department regarding the list of organisations that attended the first meeting on the 16th of December. Could I ask, why was it not considered appropriate to have a representative from road service, roads policy in attendance, and indeed a wide range of other sectors who we know that, if engaged with early, are very keen to see and help shape the future electric vehicle infrastructure?
Okay, maybe I'll take that one, Chair, rather than Tim. I suppose my point is that as Head of Transport Policy for the department, it's my team that sets transport policy and roads policy for the department. There is no separation in terms, obviously road service no longer exists, so the controlling central policy function for DFI in terms of transport comes from within my team, and we would work across the whole department to ensure that all parts of the department are represented as we make policy.
Okay. Second page, paragraph 4, refers to the development of an action plan. Will this committee see such an action plan, and will the committee be given the opportunity to comment on a draft action plan once we get to that stage?
Certainly, Chair, we would hope that the committee would be involved in the development process and in inputting to that. I mean, one of the things we've done with that, with the task force and with the working group, is try and bring everybody with something to say and something to contribute into the room to make sure that all the expertise is there, and also to make sure that we are really testing the ideas as they come forward. So certainly, yes, we would be more than happy to engage with the committee on this. I think it's essential.
Okay, thank you. I'll now go to members for questions. So I'm going to Cara Hunter first.
Sorry. Thank you very much, panel, for being here today, and thank you for the overview there surrounding the task force. My question, just in the interest of time, I'll just keep to one. The Minister has made match funding available for councils. So do we know how many have availed of this critical funding, and what more can we do as a committee to kind of endorse this and convince councils to come forward and utilise the funding available?
Tim, are you happy to take that?
Well, the funding that the Minister's made available will only be available once the council have submitted an application for ORCS funding. And the update we got from Derry City Strabane District Council to the task force was that they are progressing well with that application process, and they hope to have an application submitted by March this year. Once that application is submitted and approved, then they can draw down that funding the Minister made available. So that's where that sits. In terms of how that is progressing, in terms of what councils are involved in it, we would have to come back to you on the detail on that. As I say, we have an advisory role in the consortium, but it's Derry City Strabane are leading on it.
Okay.
Thank you very much.
Okay, thank you. Now going to Andrew Muir, please.
Thank you very much, Chair, and welcome to Liz, John and Tim. It's good to see you, albeit it is virtually. I personally really welcome this. I think it's a really positive development, and I think the inclusion of the Northern Ireland Electric Vehicle Owners Association. I think it's really good to see that. I've worked with these individuals over the last period of time, perhaps a year or 2 years, and I find their engagement to be really constructive and really pragmatic in relation to this. Just probably, and I'm conscious of time, Chair, so I'll try to keep this sort of relatively brief. It's just really in relation to the call it engagement with the industry, if you're going to put it that way, in terms of electric vehicle companies. I know there's a number of different organisations around that, just how that engagement will take place, because I know they're commercial entities, but they're quite key to be able to resolve this. And also in relation to the district councils, they're a key part of this. So just really, is there going to be also engagement with NILGA and stuff like that, because they're the driver in terms of a lot of this charging infrastructure and off-street car parks and stuff like that. And I'm just keeping my questions brief in context, so we're getting chucked out at 12 o'clock.
Okay, Tim, do you want to take both of those?
Yeah, Andrew, the way that the task force has been structured, we've asked the members that are on it to set up their own sub-working groups to bring forward ideas. So the CBI have agreed that they will work with the areas of the industry that you've mentioned to bring forward their ideas to it, as well as commercial logistic companies, so we get in their views. So they've accepted and agreed that they will set that up as a subgroup to feed into it. With the councils, we specifically targeted Derry City and Strabane District Council because whilst they're leading on the consortium to develop the ORCS application, they were also leading on other aspects with councils around EVs. So they are going to feed in the views of the councils and have agreed to set up a subgroup working with the councils as well. So hopefully that answers your question.
Yeah, that does. Thank you very much.
Okay, thank you, Andrew. Now going to Campbell Boylan, please.
Thank you, Chair, and you're all very welcome. Thanks very much for the presentations. And same, we're getting chucked out very shortly, so I'll make this short, brief as I can. I certainly welcome, obviously, this move forward, but I also welcome the fact that EVA and the Avani Group, or EVA and the association, they have the finger on the pulse, and I mean, you know, engage with them, I think is a key element. Just want to talk about, obviously we need to instill confidence in those people who want to buy EVs, and this, we've heard this terminology about range anxiety. So representing a border constituency in particular, I'm just wondering what engagement you intend to have with those along the border. I mean, like, I know people have mentioned councils, but I mean, the likes of those border corridor groups are out there, you know, and I know the East Border region knows. Have you contacted them or give them an opportunity to engage in the process as well? Because I think they would be key in relation to all of this.
Tim?
Well, we've asked the EVANI as a representative of users again to establish its own subgroup where it would draw on all those types of entities that you mentioned, Mr. Boylan. And we've also recently asked them to engage with a representative from a motorcycle group around electric motorcycles. So they have agreed that they would lead in that subgroup. So we're looking for them to lead with those kind of car groups so that we can get a feed in from those type of areas. I should also mention that the Consumer Council did raise the issues about rural usage as well. So they have fed some information already into us at our first meeting around that. So I think we have got those type of areas covered. And the department also sits in an overarching aspect of the FASTER project and East Border Region Group. So we do have good linkages with them directly if we need to get their input.
No doubt, I'm just finding, I mean, obviously it's an all-in basis, so I mean, that's the way we should be looking at it, but okay. I'll engage with those groups and try and encourage them to get involved as well, okay? Thank you very much.
Thank you. Could I now move to Roy Beggs, please, for a question?
Again, thanks for coming in front of us here. I'll endeavour to be brief as well. Welcome EVNI being included. Certainly they've been very useful in providing information to the committee, and I think will be a great addition. Some of the basic problems, as well as the faulty chargers, have been cars parked for 24 hours, up to 48 hours, and indeed cars that are charged just sit there all day, and block others from using them. So will you be at a early stage addressing that issue?
I think that Mr. Beggs, the committee has, the task force has a really wide-ranging role, and we have asked them to look at all the aspects and all the barriers, and looking at really how we make sure that uptake of electric vehicles is as easy as possible here. And so things like the legislation, for example, that would be required to stop that space blocking. I think that as we move towards more faster charging points, I think you get, it allows us to get more legislation in to stop blocking of points, and also, I suppose, coming back to, one of the sort of underlying principles of this will be that, most charging should actually take place at home. So it is really, really important that, if you do need that top up while you're out, that you do it quickly and that cars aren't blocking. So yes, I don't know exactly what it will look like yet, but it's certainly something that we will be asking the task force to think about.
Okay. And then finally, are the Department of Finance represented? Because there are important aspects in terms of building control regulations to require others to develop, I think in terms of new garages that may be built and developed, new retail opportunities, even our new transport hubs, so that through building control regulations we can require private sector investment to expand the network.
Okay, they are not directly represented on the group. We have a separate engagement with them about building regulations and about how we can use building regulations to deliver some of this. So we, as the department, we will feed that through into the group.
Okay. Last question, Liz Kimmins.
Thanks, Chair, and thank you all for the briefing this morning. I'll try to keep mine brief. I've had a couple, but I'll just stick to one here. It was just in relation, I suppose, to incentivising people to turn to electric vehicles, and obviously it's something we talk about quite a lot. And just as part of the work you're doing, I was wondering, is that something you're looking at to try and incentivise people and help make electric vehicles more affordable? Like, for instance, I previously raised the notion of providing an interest-free loan for EV purchases like they have in Scotland. So just to ask, would the task force be looking at something like that for the North?
Okay, I suppose just an important contextual piece that we're actually, through the whole energy strategy process and through the whole decarbonisation process, what we're actually trying to incentivise is a move to sustainable travel, public transport, walking, cycling. There are obviously cases where that does not work for people, so that's where we will look at incentivising the fuel shift and getting people to shift from petrol and diesel to electric. The main financial incentives at the moment come to Northern Ireland through OZEV and directly from London. They don't come through the executive. So at the moment, we have no specific incentives. However, it's certainly something that that is within the remit of the task force, and they could certainly make recommendations on that.
Okay.
Thank you.
Okay, thanks. And finally, come late there, Patrick Delargy for a quick final question. And I mean quick, we're rushed for time. Patrick, we can't hear you.
Yeah, just one last point then. Our PAC states, just looking at it, that the EV infrastructure action plan for ministerial approval is by the autumn of this year. So if that is approved, when do you think that would be published?
I can't really preempt a new minister, but we were imagining that it's approved and then published fairly swiftly, but obviously I can't bind a new minister.
Okay.
Yeah, no, that's okay. It's just as long as we have, I suppose, the opportunity to comment on that, and I hope targets will be involved in that as well. Thanks very much for that, Liz.
Okay, can I thank officials for coming this morning and apologise for the rushed nature of that presentation, but we really are under a time pressure now, but follow-up questions will be provided in writing from the committee. So thank you very much, Liz, Tim and John, for your attendance. Thank you. Okay, members, I'll wait for the spotlight to bring you all back in again. Okay. Okay, members, finally, agenda item number 10, which is the scrutiny of common transport frameworks. I'm going to hand to Jim, the Assembly Clerk, to take us through this piece and where we are in terms of comments. Jim?
Thank you, Chair. If members, excuse me, move to page 64 of package, you'll see there's a draft response to the Minister, and attached to that response there's an annex. The annex summarises the committee's consideration and scrutiny of the frameworks. Now, you'll see in your table packs there's an email from Mr Boylan with some suggestions. I've tried as far as possible to incorporate those into the draft response, so I'll go through those. If members go to page 70, you'll see towards the bottom. I didn't get any responses back from members in relation to the House of Lords Committee recommendations. Everybody seemed to be in support of those. However, Mr Boylan did make a couple of points. Firstly, in relation to the recommendation that first reviews of these 4 frameworks should include an open consultation process with stakeholders, and have suggested there the Committee for Infrastructure should be provided with the opportunity to review and comment on the draft review process prior to being finalised, including the process by which stakeholders are selected. Stakeholders which operate on a cross-border basis should be included in the consultation process. So if members are content with that. Then the next one follows on from that. The recommendation is we recommend that the UK Government and the Northern Ireland Executive consider citing appropriate additional joint ministerial council and principles as the purpose for these frameworks. And the suggestion is the committee considers essential that all parties remain cognizant of and respect the 3rd JMC EN principle, where it states frameworks will ensure recognition of the economic and social linkages between Northern Ireland and Ireland, and that Northern Ireland would be the only part of the UK that shares a land frontier with the EU. Members are content with that. Then immediately in the top of the following page, page 71, moving on to the committee's views of the frameworks themselves. Mr Boylan responded on 2 of the frameworks. The first one is the real technical common framework, and the suggestion is that whilst broadly supporting the framework and whilst recognising that the Department for Infrastructure has limited scope to legislate for technical standards for rail, the committee had some concerns that the department has no role in decision making in this framework. This could be an issue in relation to the north-south rail link should either the EU or GB diverge on rail standards. If members are content with that. And then immediately after that, the motor insurance common framework, the suggestion is that whilst broadly supporting the framework, members expressed some concern in relation to the potential for insurance checks at the border. The committee recognises that the Department for Infrastructure officials have confirmed that there are currently no plans to implement insurance checks at the border. The committee would like to receive firm assurances that there will be no insurance checks on the border at any time in the future. If members are content with that.
I see. Roy, are you looking to make comment at this stage before we move?
Yes. Well, it's not wanting any automatic insurance checks. You do want to ensure that all vehicles who are travelling in Northern Ireland are insured. So we need to be careful what we're saying here. Equally, it's up to the Republic to decide what they do to ensure that cars from Northern Ireland driving in their jurisdiction are properly insured, but certainly wouldn't want every vehicle pulled in and checked for insurance. But we just need to be careful for our language so that we do not expose the Northern Ireland public and Northern Ireland drivers by saying there should never be any checks for vehicles crossing the border.
Yeah, I think the last line in particular, if there was a potential reword there, would be appropriate. Is that the line you're talking about, Mr. Beggs? The committee would like to receive firm assurances that there will be no insurance checks on the border at any time in the future, is the one that we would need a bit more scrutiny on.
Sure, would it be helpful to put in a line that, whilst being cognizant of the need to ensure that all vehicles are appropriately insured?
Yeah, I think that's a more appropriate line. Yeah.
Putting in any time, that's the two are conflicting. Yeah. We're saying there should never be any insurance at any time, and then we say we have to check that they are insured, so that it doesn't make sense. So you would need to soften that. There should not be I don't know where it's mandatory insurance checks at the border, which would be occurring for every vehicle. I think it does need reworked.
Okay, well,
or it'll be
we'll let the clerk give you his possible reword before I'll come to members, and members can say whether they're in agreement with the reword. So hold back.
So, Mr. Boylan had a...
Cathal, do you want to say a point before that's...
No, listen, I think the clerk had said they're appropriate. He was going down the right route there.
Right, well, do you want to hear him first and then we can make comment? Yeah. Go on ahead, Jim.
Sorry, Chair, it was along the lines of whilst being cognizant of the need to ensure that all vehicles are appropriately insured.
Yeah.
The committee would like to see firmer assurances that there will be no insurance checks at the border in the future.
I think it's contradictory a wee bit myself. I think Roy's right on that point. I think we need to be careful on that particular.
Yeah.
I think you're right up until firm assurances that there will be no insurance. I think it's right up until that point. Mm-hmm. If members were content that we could end that line with the first part, I think that covers it. I think by saying there's an appropriate insurance. I'm open to members on this one. I think it's a play on words, but
appropriate.
No other members are indicating. Well, in that instance, on that particular one, we don't have agreement, unless there's a particular.
Chair, can you send through a form of words and we'll come back to email?
Okay.
That's the way we'll
okay.
do.
Okay, we can come back on that one, and I think it's just the last line. I think there is a way through on that one if we get appropriate wording. Go on ahead, Jim. I'll let you continue.
And then finally, I had an email from the chairperson, Mr. Wright, after table papers, suggesting the needs to find a solution to the protocol to avoid any unnecessary divergence that may create difficulties. And I was going to suggest perhaps to cover that one, a paragraph at the end in relation to the protocol that states the Committee for Infrastructure considers it important to emphasise the need to avoid divergence where such an approach may result in difficulties. With this in mind, the committee calls on all parties involved in the protocol negotiations to redouble their efforts to achieve a solution that works for business and for the people of Northern Ireland.
Are members content with that addition?
Yeah. Do you need to add the word trade? You're just talking about divergence. There should not be trade divergence. Is that what we're talking about, or what is being referred to there?
I think divergence.
This is specifically transport.
Transport. This is specifically on transport policy in the framework.
Well, transport divergence and transport divergence.
Chair, send it through.
Can we send that by email, please?
Yeah, send it through and highlight it. Jim, highlight those two paragraphs and we'll come back.
Yeah, so that's fair enough, members. We will come back on the motor insurance one regarding that last part with a highlighted aspect in relation to the proposed change, and we will also send through via correspondence the change regarding the aspect there at the end paragraph. Members content broadly with that? Will that, Jim, maybe finish? Did you finish, Jim, on the memo? Or
that was everything, Chair, yes.
Okay. Members content with that course of action? Yes? Agreed.
Yeah.
Okay, members, that then moves me on now to agenda item number 11, which is the Forward Work Programme, and just to draw members' attention to the Forward Work Draft Work Programme at page 85. Members are content with that?
10.
Okay, agenda item number 12, which is any other business. I do have one aspect, members, and I know we did have an extensive briefing with the Minister last week. One issue that I don't feel was adequately touched upon, that if members were in agreement, was the significant issues that are still facing funeral car drivers and indeed wedding car drivers and their difficulties regarding their involvement in the Northern Ireland Taxi Act. I know they've had considerable engagement cross-party for some time, and actually this predates all of us. Well, maybe not all of us, but it's been in the ether for some time. I think what would be appropriate if members agreed that we arrange a briefing from the taxi division within the department to address this specific part, because we know, particularly with funeral cars and indeed wedding cars, because of their involvement and attachment, unlike other parts of the United Kingdom, to the taxi legislation, means that it's become increasingly difficult to find appropriate drivers as well in what is some very delicate circumstances and difficult circumstances. So if members were in agreement, we could arrange that briefing session. Would members be agreed with that? I have a number of hands and I'm going to come to them all, but are members agreed with that course of action on that aspect first?
Agreed.
Yeah.
Great. Okay, right. I'm going to go in the order, and please, members, just try to keep it as succinct as possible. So we're going to Cathal Boylan, please, for any other business.
Chair, just 2 points quickly. Chair, me and you was in the chamber the other day when the Finance Minister was making a statement. Clearly there's additional funds there. I would like the committee to write to the Minister, is she going to apply for additional funding to try and sort out some of the additional roadworks that's needed to the end of this financial year, because there's money there. Our roads in poor condition, and I would like the Minister to apply for more money to try and address some of those issues in this financial year, because you were there at the statement the other day. So that's one issue. And another issue is the Reservoirs Act. The Ulster Anglers Federation has been on to me. There's a consultation by the policy division in the department out at the minute, and they've asked to engage with the Minister. I would like the department to respond as to why they haven't engaged with the Ulster Angler Federation in relation to this new consultation. Now, it's not on their site, but I will send on the full detail. It's the Water and Drainage Policy Division who are holding this consultation at the minute. So, but I'd like the committee support to write to the department.
So what I'm going to do here, because we have a number of hands, I'm going to go right down through all the issues, and then I'll ask at the end of the committee in agreement with each particular one. Okay, so I've noted those two. Next, Andrew Muir, please.
Thank you, Chair. I agree with what Cathal said in relation to both items there. Just in relation to roads maintenance, very disappointed that there was no bid in the October monitoring, nor in relation to the January monitoring for roads maintenance. I've done some research, and in previous monitoring rounds there has been bids. In one January monitoring round there was a bid for £18 million, and there's zero bid here in this January monitoring. So when we're sending that letter that Cal has suggested, I think we also ask for a breakdown of what bids were made for roads maintenance in previous monitoring rounds, so we have an understanding of the scale of the problem here with the Department of Infrastructure not able to spend capital money.
Okay, and we'll come back to that for agreement. So next, Liz Kimmins, please.
Thanks, Chair. Mine's just in relation to, obviously, with the backlog of MODs, I've had constituents on me who are still having issues trying to get their car tax. I think in emergency situations, when they eventually get through to somebody in DVLA and Swansea, there are options, but I think would it be possible for the committee to write to the Minister asking if the department would work to address this, because obviously it's going to affect quite a lot of people, particularly as it's not their fault, and to make sure that we communicate how you deal with that well to the public, because it's not clear at all.
Yeah, and I share your frustration at that one, but I do know that the committee will have their agreed motion on this coming, not next week, I think the week after is what it is, 7th of February, in which we would expect to see some form of plan to deal with this, but absolutely that's a point we can take up at the end. Next one is finally Roy Beggs.
I support the issue around questioning departmental officials on wedding and funeral cars, but I think it'd actually be worthwhile if we had a brief session with the funeral directors or those supplying wedding cars in advance to ensure that we are well informed of the issues that they are facing. The other aspect regarding this January monitoring round and the lack of bids, have we had any clarity of whether any additional resources have been committed towards the ability of the departmental officials to prepare bids? Because it was explained to us some time ago that some of the staff's units were halved, and there's a lack of capacity to deliver in your bids. I think it's also much better that tar goes down on the road, not in the winter time in wet, frosty conditions. I understand that you get much better results by putting it down in a planned fashion at warmer times and drier times of the year. Okay. Members, right, we have a number of ones. I'm going to run down through them all now. So firstly, on the wedding and funeral car and the request for a briefing from the department, I take Roy's point on board. We are due a session with taxis in relation to obviously the ongoing issue about entrapment as well. So I think maybe if we could arrange that session to be, obviously we could have representatives from wedding and funeral car, and then the department after that to respond, and then after that obviously they can give us their closed session if needed on taxi entrapment. Are members content with that, and we can write to the department on those issues? Is that agreed?
Yeah.
Okay, that's agreed. Next aspect, share members' concerns absolutely in relation to the roads maintenance budget and the lack of bids in relation to that. Are members content with the course of action of writing to the department regards our concern that there was no bid for roads maintenance, and also calling on the minister to bid for that additional funding that was talked about in the chamber by the finance minister on Monday or Tuesday? I can't quite remember which day it was now. Are members content with that course of action? Sorry, Roy first. Roy first, and then Cara. Go on ahead, Roy. I'm content, provided we also asked what additional resources are being made so that bids can be made in the future. Yes, and take your point also. We can add in relation to timing of roads maintenance and how we can put it to best use. No point throwing good money after bad either. Okay, Cara, sorry, you wanted to come in on that point? Yep. No, thank you, Chair. No, I have no problem in writing to the Minister to ask for further clarity and information around bids, but as far as I'm aware, the committee has been made aware of a number of legal challenges surrounding roadworks, so just to note that. Thank you. Okay, next one, which was the reservoir engagement with anglers. Are members content that if Cahill Boylan supplies in writings his particular query on that the committee can then ask questions of the department regarding engagement with that sector? Members content? Content, okay. And finally, yes, MOT backlog. Are members content with the course of action as suggested by Liz Kimmins on that as well? Yes. Agreed? Yeah. Agreed. Okay, thanks members, that was quite a list, but we're not too outside of time. I don't think we're going to get thrown out quite yet. So agenda item number 12, we've completed now with any other business. So agenda item number 13, which is date, time and location of next meeting. The next meeting will take place at 10 a.m. Wednesday the 2nd of February 2022 in room 30 in Parliament Buildings. Can I advise members of the need to maintain social distancing when leaving and lift every bit of item with you. Thank you members for your indulgence, and have a good day. Thanks. And I'll call the meeting. Thanks.
This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 29. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 29. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 29. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 29. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 29. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 29. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 29. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 29. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 29. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 29. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 29. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 29. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 29. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 29. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 29. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 29. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 29. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 29. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 29. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 29. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 29. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 29. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 29. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 29. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 29. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 29. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 29. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 29. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 29. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 29. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 29. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 29. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 29. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 29. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 29. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 29. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 29. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 29. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 29. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 29. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 29. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 29. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 29. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 29. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 29. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 29. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 29. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 29. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 29. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 29. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 29. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 29. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 29. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 29. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 29. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 29. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 29. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 29. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 29. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 29. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 29. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 29. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 29. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 29. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 29. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 29. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 29. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 29. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 29. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 29. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 29. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 29. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 29. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 29. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 29. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 29. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 29. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 29. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 29. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 29. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 29. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 29. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 29. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 29. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 29. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 29. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 29. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 29. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 29. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 29. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 29. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 29. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 29. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 29. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 29. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 29.